Hello and welcome to the Chorus Forum on Accessibility and Open Research, focusing on advancements, challenges, and future directions. For those of you who don't know me, I am Howard Ratner, the Executive Director of Chorus. So we've had over 150 people register for today's event from all around the globe. And today's workshop will run until 12:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and will also be recorded for later viewing. Today's event would not be possible without the generous sponsorship coming from ACM, Springer Nature, AIP Publishing, ACS, Wiley, Silverchair, and STM. Today's workshop will be governed by our code of conduct, so we will have a positive experience for all participants. So please, do not engage in harassment of any kind. Do not post anything that a reasonable person would consider offensive, abusive, or hate speech. Do not post anything obscene or sexually explicit. Do not impersonate people. And finally, do not expose private information. So a note about Zoom chat that I've actually just learned. Note that anything entered into the Zoom chat may be read aloud by screen readers or other accessibility tools used by some participants. Please keep this in mind to ensure that your messages are appropriate and considerate for all of our attendees. Also, during the Q&A session, we will be asking you to both use chat and also, if you wanted to talk, raise your hand in the React button to ask a question. And also note that we have created a Google Doc to post short use cases on accessibility, as well as accessibility resources that you might know that, and you can find that link in the chat, which I think is going to be entered now. So before we begin, a few brief words about Chorus. Integrity, collaboration, and openness are the cornerstones of our research ecosystem. By uniting funders, institutions, and publishers, Chorus aims to cultivate a more equitable future for knowledge dissemination. Together, we can prioritize collaboration and progress for a more open world. We are a community effort dedicating to making open research work. Our goals are to help our main stakeholders of publishers, institutions, and funders scale their OA compliance. We work to make data a first-class citizen. We work to improve the overall quality of their metadata related to open research. We host forums and workshops like today's forum to connect our stakeholders so they can all learn and hopefully build trust with each other. So just to get into it, we have a stellar moderator in Judy Russell, the Dean of University Libraries, the University of Florida, and an A-list of speakers today. Now over to you, Judy, to get the show on the road. So Judy, you want to come on mic and come on video, and all the panelists can do the same.
Thank you very much, Howard, and welcome everyone. As he said, I am Judy Russell. I'm the Dean of University Libraries at the University of Florida, and I'll be moderating the forum today. We are building on insights from our October 23 Chorus Forum on supporting accessibility, and today we'll delve deeper into the recent advancements, ongoing challenges, and future directions in making research and scholarly publications more accessible to all, including those with disabilities. This is not just an ethical imperative, it's increasingly a legal and regulatory requirement. Since the 2003 forum, several initiatives and improvements have emerged across the publishing and research communities. There's increased awareness around accessibility that has driven meaningful change in both policy implementation and technological solutions. There have been new developments in accessibility standards, compliance strategies, and digital tools that enhance usability for all users, especially those with visual, auditory, cognitive, and motor impairments. But we still have many challenges ahead. Howard has already identified the three panelists who will be speaking today. I have asked each of them to start with a brief introduction and explanation of their own personal commitment to accessibility. And following those introductions, each of the panelists will lead a brief discussion of one of the three topics we have identified. And those topics are: who is responsible and accountable for accessibility? Some case studies about implementation of accessibility, and finally, a wish list for the short and long-term progress that we need to make on accessibility. We will have the panelists address your questions after all three panel discussions have concluded, but please put your questions in the chat as they occur to you. I will start with some of my own background. In 1999, when I was deputy director of a small federal agency, the National Commission on Libraries and Information Science, known affectionately as NCLIS, we held a hearing on information services for individuals with disabilities. Although I already had a strong personal commitment to accessibility, there was one statement made at the hearing that significantly influenced my commitment and my future actions. And that statement was, "We are all only temporarily abled." Think about that. We are all only temporarily abled. As librarians, publishers, users, user advocates, we're seeking to make information accessible not just for individuals with disabilities, but for all users, with the expectation that we can't know when we or a family member, friend, or colleague will need accessible content and services, and it's no longer adequate or appropriate to address specific content at the moment of need with the inherent delays that that may cause. We need to be proactive and prepared to reduce barriers for all users. In addition to our personal needs, interests, and commitments, we're now being directed by legal and regulatory requirements in Europe and the US. As the Dean of University Libraries at the University of Florida, I'm involved in licensing content for our students, faculty, and researchers, and I'm also responsible for Library Press at UF, a small, mostly open access publishing initiative that's an imprint of the University of Florida Press. As I negotiated with publishers for improved accessibility to their content, I also realized that I could not and should not be asking publishers to do something that we were not doing ourselves. When we tested our own publications, which we believed we were producing accessible publications, we determined that ours were not as good as they could be or should be. And so we have made changes and first improving those publications that we tested. And now we've recommitted to having all of our books tested for accessibility before publication. And we're working on making our admittedly small back file fully accessible. So I appreciate the challenges of producing accessible content and the even greater challenge of dealing with making past content accessible. I'm very pleased to be participating in the presentations of our panelists and look forward to a discussion with you on this important topic. Please, again, put your questions and comments in the chat, remembering that lengthy text may interfere with attendees using screen readers. I'm going to turn now to the panelists and ask them each to identify themselves, starting with Letty.
Hi, everyone. I'm Letty Conrad. I'm an independent researcher and consultant. I'm based in Southern California. And I look forward to sharing a bit about how I came to this topic. Judy, do you want us to do that at this point, or should we do quick intros first?
I think you can
Just to
combine them.
confirm.
I did.
Combine the two. Okay, perfect. So I got my start in scholarly communications on really the communications and publishing technology side of things. I began in product development and product design about 20 years ago, and that brought me to the methods and theories of human-centered design. And that is really how I entered into passion and advocacy for accessible content and accessible services so that we are supporting every human that wants or needs information or services that we provide. So in my consultancy, I work with content providers as well as technology and service providers, and bringing that human-centered approach to everything I do means ensuring that accessibility compliance is reached in every place that it can be. So that's just a quick intro from me. Simon, I think over to you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Simon Holt, and I'm based in Oxford in the UK, and I'm the head of content accessibility at the science publisher Elsevier, and where I also lead disability inclusion efforts. I'm a visually impaired person myself, and therefore this affects me personally as well as professionally. The first thing that I learned when I left university was that in the UK, and it's the same in the US, 75% of vision impaired people of working age are unemployed. And that led me to think, well, what is the cause of this? Why is this the case? Accessibility, of course, goes beyond vision impaired people, but actually access to information, to knowledge, and to learning is fundamental to what we do as information and scholarly communications professionals, right? Whether we're on the publisher side or we're on the library side, or indeed on, another side. And so therefore, for me, I see accessibility as fundamentally core to our principles, in terms of our mission as publishers, right? As publishers, what we do is curate, enrich, and disseminate content. And actually, when you think about, for example, adding image description, so alt text to images, what you're doing there is enriching content by converting a non-text asset to a text asset, which is great for discoverability, data mining, etc., etc., etc. And that helps people learn in whatever way suits them, whether it's reading with their eyes or listening with their ears or even touching with their hands. And actually, the reason that I'm so passionate about accessibility is because I believe really that in the age of technology in which we live, and we'll talk a bit more about the future of accessibility a bit later on. I feel we have an opportunity to really help people learn in whatever way suits them, and to create environments that are best for learning in whatever way suits each individual. And I really feel that accessibility is a core part of that. I think there are a lot more opportunities now than there were when I started about 20 years ago. And I feel that accessible content is really fundamental to helping people learn and grow and enrich in terms of their knowledge, and also the opportunities, therefore, that they have to lead empowered and independent lives. And so that's who I am and why I feel that this is really important. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you to Howard and Tara and Judy and my co-presenters for the opportunity to speak about this vital and critical topic in libraries and information. My name is Caroline Coward. I am the head of the library at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I'm coming to you from Pasadena, California, where it's bright and sunny outside. My own journey to accessibility came through first 20 years in higher education as an information literacy librarian, where I interacted with students and faculty needing information to do their research and assisting them with accessing the information. For me, accessibility is wrapped up in information equity, the ability of all to access the information that they need. And after 20 years in higher ed, I came to NASA, I came to JPL, and realized that accessibility was far more than screen readers or auditory assistants or anything like that. It had to do with the physical location of the library in the institution. At JPL, we're up a very steep hill. And not everybody, all of our engineers and technologists, not everybody can make it up that hill. So that limits who can physically come to the library. JPL itself is built on a terraced hillside. When I first got there, I would often remark it's the least accessible place in the world, even though we are directly governed by the Americans with Disabilities Act. JPL leadership has made a lot of strides and done their best to make the facility as accessible as possible. There's still some challenges, but we have come leaps and bounds from when I started there almost 8 years ago. So I am here to discuss with everyone, not just the presenters, but I'm sure all of the attendees have some great ideas and object lessons and lessons learned that we can take from to talk about accessibility of information, again, not just auditory or visual, but physical accessibility, realizational accessibility, some hidden disabilities. I also co-chair our neurodiversity lab network, an amazing group of, again, technologists and engineers and scientists who may need some additional assistance accessing information. Really looking forward to talking about use cases and your own examples and learning from the entire group. Thanks so much.
Thank you all for those introductions. And I think, Letty, you're going to start us off with a very important and complex topic. Who is responsible and accountable for accessibility?
Yes, indeed. I remember first asking this question when I was leading the journals platform at Sage Publishing, also based in Southern California, sunny, beautiful Southern California. And we really weren't clear, how to resource for ensuring compliance, how to resource to train those who manage content, the complexities of metadata for those who are not technical, the regulatory space for those who are not legal experts. And one of the things that we found, and I have recommended to clients and colleagues over the last several years, is a kind of shared responsibility structure. And when I say that, I don't mean everyone's responsible, and so we can just assume that someone else is going to take care of it. But what I mean is some strong leadership, a point person or an executive who really has a vision for how to pull together all the various skills and functions across an organization. But every single one of those folks with different areas of expertise, whether those be regulatory or technical or in my realm in design, we all need to pull together and contribute those areas of expertise for the collective goal of ensuring accessibility compliance. And when we say that, I want to be clear, for most of us in this virtual room, the scope of responsibility for accessibility compliance is really focused on the content that we license, the content that we publish, and the content that we are helping readers and users of all kinds to access. And so that means print as well as web interfaces. We're talking about platforms, services, peer review systems, e-commerce platforms, mobile apps, all that kind of stuff. So we do need to think holistically about all those points of information that our organizations are facilitating access to. Now, from a legal perspective, there have been a number of formats or approaches to responsibility. There are some, like the US ADA, the Accessibility, the Americans with Disability Act, apologies. That policy is really holding institutions that license content, the institutions that have direct access to the users who have needs for accessible content or accessible services. So the ADA is looking to institutions like research firms, labs like Caroline's, libraries, academic libraries, research institutions, public libraries, a whole range of institutions. Those are the responsible parties in the ADA framework. But there are others, for instance, the EAA, and I know in our poll results, a number of you were talking about really trying to understand the EAA. Well, one thing that I've learned that's really important is that the European Union's Accessibility Act is looking to the actual source of the content, so the publishers, the content providers, and holding those folks responsible for ensuring accessible content. I don't want to say either one is right or wrong. They're two different frameworks. But I think for each of us as members of organizations that we serve, we are best served with a shared responsibility model, one where we could have maybe, say, a working group with one lead point person or an executive sort of, charter, if you will, to really pull together those different resources and capabilities that enable accessibility compliance. And Simon, I want to throw to you in part because you have taught me so much in this space about rallying an organization and pulling together the right resources and the right voices. You are that strong leadership at Elsevier. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on who's responsible for accessibility.
Sure. So I think you're quite right, Letty, in that everybody has responsibility. And I'm going to nuance that slightly by saying everybody has responsibility to engage, right? Everybody has their own expertise. But if I think about content, which is the area that I'm responsible for, right? Actually, as publishers, I'd say we are responsible for providing the content, but I'd say that authors have responsibility for engaging with the content and checking that what we're providing is correct. And readers have responsibility in helping us by flagging up anything that they see as incorrect, right? And also, I'd say in making sure that they give feedback to us, good, bad, or indifferent, right? So, for
Mhm.
example, recently we ran some pilots around our alt text provision because we wanted to get end user feedback, right? And we found it very difficult to find end users with a scientific background who have accessibility needs. And that leads me on to the wider community, right? Obviously, I know that we have some librarians here. Actually, as a community, if we care about nothing about us without us, can librarians help bridge the gap between publishers and end users to help validate this offering? Because otherwise, what we're going to find is publishers are going to have all of these accessibility features that they're going to produce without any real idea of whether these are fit for purpose or actually doing the job that they're meant to be doing. So I see some responsibility in terms of engagement from librarians there as well. And then obviously I'm thinking about things, Letty, you set out really well from a legal point of view, right? Clearly, um, from a publisher point of view, we are now getting asked by institutions, what are you doing around EAA? What are you doing about ADA? We've put forward, people put out there, you can go on our website and find out some statements articulating in quite some detail the approach that we're taking, right? But actually, one of the things that we really need from the library community is to be a bit clear about what information it is that you guys need in terms of
Mm.
compliance and what does that mean. So I often get asked the question, is the works that we license from you compliant? Okay, well, what do you need to feel satisfied? you know do you need something at a title level? I keep being told that's too much. Or a journal article level, I keep being told that's too much. Is a summary level with our approach okay? So I would say that when I talk about responsibility for all of us, I don't want this to become a everyone's responsible, so nobody's responsible kind of thing, right? But I do feel that everybody has a responsibility to engage and to think that in their own role, how can they move this forward? Each
Yeah.
person for themselves, because actually part of what we're trying to achieve here when we're thinking about not just the laws, but where we want to go with accessibility is we want to change this from an optional extra and a nice to have to actually a core part of everything we do, as I mentioned in my intro. And we need,
Mhm.
to do that, we need to change this from a kind of a cost and compliance narrative to and a kind of an investment and opportunity um,
Yeah.
narrative, right? An investment doesn't just mean money from a publisher; it means time and knowledge and engagement from everybody within our community. So I agree with you, Letty, that we're all responsible, but I'd say we're all responsible in quite a specific way, as
Mm.
opposed to in kind of a general way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Caroline, I don't know what your thoughts were
Yeah, I
there.
would also like to add in terms of responsibility. I mean, quite often when we think about compliance, we think about responsibility. Um, there is an urge to, yes, be compliant to the letter of the law or the letter of the regulation, but that often results in doing the least required,
Mm.
doing the bare minimum to
Hmm.
tick the box and say done, don't have to think about that anymore. In one of our preparation chats, I mentioned a phrase that I call Schrodinger's accessibility, when something is at once accessible and inaccessible, when the vendor or the company or whoever is responsible for the content claims and can prove with the letter of the law that this is accessible or it's supposed to be in whatever way, yet the person that needs the information, the
Hmm.
user on the other end, still can't get to it, whether that is a visual aid or auditory or accessing it physically. I'm dealing with something like this right now in terms of a federally mandated employee training packet that is supposed to be accessible. And I'm going through something right now. I'm having a problem with my eyes that I have to really limit my screen time. And so I'm looking for the auditory component. I'm looking for the press to play, somebody read this, read the screen to me. It's a temporary problem, so it doesn't require me to, download fancy screen readers and learn new software. But just that little bit of help. I mean, Judy, you mentioned at the outset we were all temporarily abled, and it's so true. It is so true. So I'm dealing with what I call Schrodinger's accessibility right now. And when we think about compliance and responsibility, I think whomever is offering the content, creating the content, really needs to be responsive to the users, Simon, as you said, and work with them when they say to you, no, I still can't get to the content. Take them seriously. Work with them. Try and think of alternatives, creative alternatives, so that they can be compliant on their end.
Yeah, I love Schrodinger's accessibility. I can think of an example, actually, a use case, if you will. I have been part of teams that have conducted accessibility audits for publishers' platforms. And you can run automated checks against a web page. There are a number of tools out there that allow you to do that. And it's kind of, as you were saying, Carolyn, it ticks, it's kind of looking to tick a box or not in an automated fashion. And that can be a really helpful, just quick, way of getting a sense of where the biggest needs are. But I always advocate during those audits to do what I call a heuristic analysis, which is to take a human-centered approach to actually trying to access all the content available on that page, and to look at the automated results, both good and bad. One example of Schrodinger's accessibility that I've come across is the alt text tag. You can pass an automated check simply by having the words alt text in the tag. Well, who does that help? Right? Or a caption, maybe you're repeating the caption. Maybe that's a little bit of a step better. It's useful content, but it's already being read through a screen reader. It's already accessible in many ways because the caption is tagged. So alt text is one of those areas of responsibility where we need a shared obligation model. We need authors to be educated and engage and to be part of, whether you're using AI or a vendor or other services to create maybe a first draft of alt text. You need authors to be part of the validation and maybe editing sign-off process. You then need metadata and content composition experts to package that correctly, integrate it with your files, deliver it to the right places, make sure it's showing on the web correctly. Audit and re-audit your sites and your services. We need multiple prongs in that shared obligation model in order to deliver alt text that really is of value to users. So I think that's a great example. I love that term. I'm going to use that.
I hate to stop this conversation. We could probably do the entire hour and a half on this conversation. very, very important one and a very complicated one. I will make one mention before we move on that Simon and I have talked a number of times about how important it is that a lot of this is done collaboratively.
Yeah.
It's not going to be helpful for a publisher to develop standards that they're going to use if that hasn't been agreed to collaboratively with the users. That's, I think, the point that all of you are making, is that it is a process where we have to be engaged together to come up with the right solutions. So, but I appreciate your helping all of us think about this important topic of what's my responsibility, but also who is accountable and who's responsible. And I think with that, we're going to move on. And Caroline has there's a lot of important work already underway. And you're going to lead us through a discussion of some case studies that will provide insight into how the challenges of accessibility are being addressed. And we have created a Google Doc. There was a link already in the chat. We may repeat it again for people who came in late. And we ask you if you have a case study, just to very simply add it to that document. And after the forum, we'll be sending out some additional information, including information that comes from that Google Doc. So again, please think about your own case study as she's leading us through a discussion of some of the important case studies that already exist.
Thank you,
Carol.
Judy. And to frame this for everyone, I really, when we say, I prefer the term use cases. For me, case study implies something very formal and set up with a principal investigator and something that's going to be published. Nothing like that of the sort. The use cases, meaning your own stories, the roadblocks everyone here has run into when either assisting someone who needs the content who simply can't get to it, or our own. I mean, I'm thinking of myself with my own temporary, hopefully temporary, visual impairment, or stories you've heard, sometimes horror stories of accessibility issues and problems, especially tangling with organizations, institutions, leadership, HR, whoever, going back to responsibility, whoever is institutionally responsible for making sure the access is there. So I mentioned my own having to do a federally mandated employee training. I'm already overdue because this thing is not accessible to me. And I've gone back and forth with the content provider who insists it's accessible. And I've already told my manager that I'm going to be overdue for this training. Just know, and because they're well aware of the challenges that I'm dealing with right now. I am actively on the lookout for these use cases. One that was pointed up to me in a kind of funny way. I'm connected on Facebook with the head of our planetary protection and astrobiology, a fellow named Dr. David Grinspoon at NASA headquarters. And he posted on Facebook about the inaccessibility of many charts and graphs and color component content. NASA has charts and graphs everywhere. I mean, it's part and parcel of how we present our data, but it's all visual. And often the color gradations and the color transparency and how bright it is, the contrast makes it inaccessible for people with certain visual impairments, red green color blindness, all kinds of things. And there was a long thread about why this is, what can be done, why wasn't this particular chart that he was talking about, why wasn't this made accessible to more people? And it really got me thinking about how we present scientific information in journals, in presentations, poster sessions at conferences, when we go to a conference and we print out our slides or we print out our graphs. How many of us are thinking about attendees who may have this red-green color blindness, for example, may not grasp the nuance or even be able to read the chart, the data that we have so lovingly and painstakingly collected, having it up there, and the people that we're supposed to be influencing and presenting to, all they see is gray. All they see is gray. So that's one use case that's really top of mind for me. And as head of the library at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, it's my responsibility to make sure that all scientific content, rather external scientific content, our curated collections, are accessible to our users. So that's one example of a use case that I want to throw out there. I'm really interested for everyone attending today. Please go onto that Google Doc if you can, and if you're comfortable, share a use case that you may have dealt with or that you're dealing with, even if there is no resolution, even if it's in process. And I'd love to start a community dialogue about maybe some best practices, maybe some advice, who you can talk to in your organization, who can get the problem solved. Because those of us with disabilities, those of us with the need for the content access, quite often we come up with our own creative solutions because we've been doing this all our lives. right? Because we've been hitting these roadblocks and thinking about, okay, I just need to access the content. How can I make this work for me? And that solution is likely good for others, many others in my own case. So in my own use case example, when I emailed the gal that was working with me on the content, I said, if you can just convert all the slides and all the videos to one long PDF document, I can have my screen reader read it to me. And I can email you the answer, because there's always a quiz. There's, for these trainings, they always do a true false Likert scale quiz at the end to make sure you're compliant, you pass. Just give me a PDF and it'll read it to me, and I'll send you the answers to the quiz questions. Nope, it's compliant. It's accessible as it is. Not going to do that. And I'm thinking, this is a federally mandated worker training. I've got to just work with me, please. So roadblocks, stumbling blocks, use cases, stories. Let's come together as a community and try and help each other, help the people that need the content. I welcome comments from anybody.
Carolyn, hearing that story from the provider, the gal that you talked to, I'm just cringing because I'm feeling that pain. She's probably stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? She's got an engineer or a team of engineers who's saying, we pass all the automated checks. I've done the testing. We're fine. Well, she's not the expert, right? Necessarily. And so she's got to toe the line for the company, but she's also not meeting you halfway as far as having empathy. And that's one of the things I would say is my use case, and I'll share this in the doc afterward, is in my job as a product developer and product designer, I'm constantly educating folks. It's not enough for an automated check, for instance. I did an exercise with the engineering team for LibLinks, where I'm doing much of my work these days. And I had the team either disable their mouse controls, or put it across the room, or I have a switch, I just turn it off. Try to do the thing that we're trying to build. Do your testing with keyboard controls only. They got so upset with me. What? That's not possible. That's not fair. We have to run. No. If we're going to pass testing and we're going to pass compliance, I need you to take a moment and put yourself in the shoes of people who do not have the dexterity and the mobility capacity to manage a mouse. Oh, it was mind-blowing for them. And same for the
Just
CEO.
wait till your wireless mouse runs out of battery.
Well, there's that.
And,
Yes, exactly.
and similarly, just to jump in, Letty,
Yeah,
just
please.
before you continue, actually, we hear a lot about doing testing with screen readers. If you're doing a test with screen readers, then you must blindfold yourself. Otherwise, you're not really using the screen reader properly.
No, it's not
You
fair.
need to rely on the screen reader. Otherwise, you're not really
Absolutely.
using it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, simulations. In the design space, you see a lot about age suits, designers of, say, a piece of equipment or an automobile. They might simulate different types of ability or lack of ability. But we need to be doing that in the content space, in the digital environment as well. I've talked to so many heads of sales and CEOs who say, I'm really not going to worry about accessibility right now because I've talked to all of our clients and I don't think anyone has a problem. I don't think anyone in our client base has a disability. Well, as Carolyn said, there are a range of disabilities, many of which are hidden or temporary. And how often do you just volunteer these things, about it's very vulnerable to say, I have, I don't know, neurodivergence, or, I have, an issue with my eyesight, or what have you. It's an issue of vulnerability. People don't want to share it. So we assume, and the education that I think we all have to do in these situations that we find ourselves in is encourage people to put their own worldview aside just for a hot second and see a different perspective and think about the world experienced through a different lens, if you will, with different capabilities. So those are the use cases that come to my mind.
I do want to add before I throw it to Simon, because Simon, I want to hear your use cases. I'm sure you've got tons of them. One thing that is really empowering me is my position as a manager at my institution. And I do have the privilege and the responsibility to speak out and to advocate on behalf of anyone who has an accessibility challenge or and needs to get to information content, not just because I'm kind of going through it myself right now, but I am in a managerial position. I'm in a leadership position. So my voice may be louder, maybe more meaningful than others. And I do feel a strong responsibility to kind of carry the ball for folks and speak for folks and anticipate, or at least try and anticipate some needs. The one thing I need to talk about the elephant in the room that we haven't mentioned yet, and that's money. The money,
Ah,
the cost involved
yeah.
in making content accessible after the fact, which of course is always much more expensive than baking accessibility into the design and development of whatever content it is. That's,
Mhm.
if only we had thought about it when we were doing the back of the napkin, this would have cost, 30% less or whatever. So in going back and forth with the person I'm communicating with, not only is she thinking about design engineers and functionality, she's probably thinking about labor
Right.
and onboarding new software or whatever it is, and working within those constraints. However, going back to the responsibility and compliance issue, we have to do this whatever the cost. We need to make it work, and this is why working with the community, with the challenge, with the disability, as I said, we often come up with very creative solutions, workarounds that are no cost or low cost. So this is the roadblock that I'm facing. Simon, your thoughts. I'm really anxious to hear what you have to say.
Um, yeah, thanks a lot. Super interesting. And I suppose listening to yourself and listening to Letty, I'm going to answer wearing a few different hats, right? Because obviously, as an individual with a disability, and then also someone who works for a large publisher, right? So, first of all, as an individual, I was smiling quite a lot when you were talking about the compliance course thing, right? Because, that's been me every day of my working life, right?
Oh,
That is the reality. And actually, we solved this problem at Elsevier only because basically we got to a point where we were able to find the people who sign the contract to get these compliance courses in, and we're able to explain to them why it was important from their point of view, right? And actually, if when you can make a case where you say, okay, we have X percentage of people with disabilities, your target is to have Y percentage of people, presumably 100% of people, complete these courses. Actually, let us help you achieve your goals by helping us achieve our goals, right? And I think one of the things that I do want to talk about in terms of accessibility, and you talked about money before, I feel quite strongly that we need to think about the narrative here, right? And one thing that I'm always thinking about, and hey, I'm going to say this because I work for a commercial organization, actually, accessibility works when we can tie it to the goals of the mission, the mission and goals of the company. And at a company like mine, I hate to say it, that probably involves, making some money as well,
mhm.
right? And so therefore, I think when we think about disability inclusion, there's various models, right? So there's the medical model that talks about, your visual impairment because your eyes don't work. There's the charity model that basically says, we need to do everything for you because you can't do it yourself. There's a social model that basically says, you have a disability because the environment in which you're in is malaligned to your medical condition, right? And that's the one that I believe in because it's basically about empowerment. It's about changing the environment to make sure that it's more inclusive, which is obviously what accessibility is about as well, right? We change the environment, we make the digital environment, whether that's content or whether that's websites, more accessible. And it means that more people can participate. But actually, we need to think about why it's important that people are able to participate themselves, right? When we think about accessibility for content, for me, I'm thinking, okay, so that means making things available to people with disabilities at the same time, to the same quality, and with the same ease of use as everybody else. Well, why is that important? Well, it's important because the expectations we have of people with disabilities should be exactly as high as everybody else, right? And so for me, when I think about accessibility use cases and barriers, the frustrations tend to come um, not only because it's more difficult for me to do some stuff, but moreover that I find that often when I talk to people, they don't expect me to be able to do it. And fundamentally, I have a higher expectation than that of myself, and expect others to have a higher expectation of me as well, right? I can, and I need you to help me make sure that I can. On a commercial, enterprise-wide, big publisher type of level, because obviously that's what I do for a living, I think the main challenge that we have at Elsevier is one of scale, right? We publish 17% of the world's scientific output, whether that's books, journals. I found out today we publish 760,000 journal articles every year, right? And as you said, making content accessible costs money, right? Whether we're talking adding out text to front list or whether we're talking backlist, right? So go forward publications or previous publications. Um, I'm going to be honest, that a challenge that I've had is really trying to get authors engaged in this. So, we did some pilots saying, do authors want to write out text themselves? Not really is the answer. And the quality of out text that were found from authors is really variable. Some of it's great, some of it's really not great. And if we want consistency, we feel that the best way forward is to provide the alt text and then get the authors to validate it, because we're then using their expertise in terms of the science, as opposed to getting them to write a ton of descriptions in a technical style alt text that they may or may not be engaged with. But that costs money, and when we're talking about to the same quality, same ease of use, same time, that means that if a non-disabled person has access to 10 articles, a disabled person needs to have access to the same 10 articles. Having access to one article or two articles isn't good enough, right? It must be exactly the same. And so for me, in terms of our challenge at Elsevier, honestly, this is one of scale, right? And this isn't one of saying, we don't want to spend the money. If I tell you that for alt text, this is just alt text for our books program, just for our 2025 books, we will spend over $1 million just on the alt text. And if I tell you that we publish 10 times the amount of journal content compared to book content, and then if we talk about all of the previously published content, it quickly becomes not very viable, right? So actually, for me, it's about thinking, how can we provide accessible content to the standard that I believe is absolutely vital, in a way that is sustainable? Because as a champion and as an advocate for this, I care about content being accessible in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? Actually, spending a whole heap of money, millions and millions of dollars, is a surefire way for somebody to come along in 2 years and decide, actually, this isn't very viable anymore. That's not what I want. That's not what anybody wants, right? So from a publisher point of view, trying to make this work at scale in a financially viable way, making sure that it doesn't affect quality and doesn't affect speed. That's what the main challenge is right now, I would say.
Making sure that the process and product are both sustainable.
Yeah.
You mentioned, going backward and going forward, making sure
Exactly.
that whatever changes or attunements you make to the process, you can keep going in 10 years and
Right.
20
And that we're
years.
not promising a ton of stuff that we can deliver. Like, accessibility isn't a magic bullet. I'm not going to click my fingers and say today everything's
Yeah.
accessible.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a process, and this is going to be a multi-year process, folks. Like, let's not pretend otherwise, right? That I think at Elsevier there is over 130 people now who do accessibility as a significant part of their role. there's not a lack of will or lack of resources here. And we need to make sure that if we're saying to people, yeah, the content that we're licensing to you is accessible, that we really understand what that means. And so, yeah, we're taking this super seriously. And that's why I'm having such a frank conversation with you today. If I wasn't taking it seriously, I'd just say, yeah, we're making everything accessible and it's all great. But actually, I think we're all a little bit more grown up than that.
Yeah.
I want to congratulate Elsevier for taking the initiative, for pulling the Library Accessibility Advisory Group together, for making this issue so at the front of so many initiatives and putting real resources behind this. I hope other vendors and other publishers do the same and make it as important as Elsevier has. I really applaud the company for doing this. I want to make two other points while we're still talking about use cases, and something that we're talking about. The word accessibility is a very broad term, and it means many things to many different people and can be interpreted different ways. And this is why, in planning for this talk, I asked the group, what's our common definition of accessibility? What's our kind of ground truth here? And how can we find a common ground, and can we build on it? And as I mentioned, when I was in higher education, I really was kind of stuck in the voice recording and screen reader world. That was accessibility. And now that I am working in a heavily inaccessible physical space, it means a lot more to me. So thinking about all of our institutions and the definition of accessibility for the institution and for the broader community, I also wanted to kind of go back to a point that I mentioned, the physical accessibility of the information, whether that's the co-location of the library on your campus or at your institution. Is it up a steep hill? Is it only accessible by stairs? Is it kind of around the corner and not accessible by somebody in a wheelchair, for example? Or is where you keep your information, is it behind paywalls, firewalls, digitally inaccessible? What are the challenges to getting to the information? And I wanted to ask Judy, as the dean of a university library, what has University of Florida said or done or thought about physical accessibility and the library? Do you have experience with that?
I have some, and obviously we're an older university, and so we have some older buildings that are very real challenges. For the most part, our libraries are reasonably accessible in terms of ramps and elevators and wide corridors and a number of the other kinds of things that really matter. But I know that's not the case for large parts of the university with older dorms where there's only a walk-up dorm, with older office buildings where you have to walk a half a block and come in from another area just to get an elevator to get up and then walk back over somehow to get through. So, I think, we've been fortunate that we've been able to work really well on physical accessibility with our buildings. But I know that it's not been easy or inexpensive even for the libraries, and it's definitely a huge challenge for the rest of the university.
Thank you.
And an expense.
Yeah.
Money. If I could just offer one more use case before we leave that topic. The conversations around finances and the commercial models, the social models that Simon was talking about, reminds me of conversations I've had, with heads of sales and CEOs and others, content providers and service providers, who have said, look, we're not very big. We're not an Elsevier. We don't have tons of resources. How do we move the needle here? And I want to say a couple of things. My arguments are twofold. Simply running an audit and having a sense of where your gaps are and then being transparent about those gaps, that is the biggest and first most important step any provider can make. And you can move the needle right now just by doing that. And that is a very low cost function. Secondarily, the reason why this is worth an investment beyond that audit, but to continue to roll out improvements, to have a roadmap that you're sharing to iteratively make those improvements. The arguments are, one, it's a whole lot cheaper than being sued if you don't do it. I guarantee you, every court case I've ever read about, when I do a back of the napkin calculation of what it would have taken for them to have Domino's Pizza to have fixed their e-commerce app, it is small in comparison to what they paid out in court fees. Secondarily, why on earth would you go and exclude 1.5 billion people from your potential customer base? I mean, this just boggles my mind that I have to continue to remind folks, that this is like saying, oh, I'm not going to sell to the entire country of India, or I'm just going to, I'm going to take this whole sector of people and intentionally exclude them from being part of my customer base. So those arguments alone should encourage all of us to take a little step each day and to engage every day in moving the needle on accessibility for our organizations.
That's a very important comment, and I think we're going to need to stop there and move on to our.
Although, Judy, if I could, I encourage everyone
Caroline, you
here.
wanna wrap up?
Yeah, Tara, could you post the link to where people can post their use cases? Again, you put that in the chat. I just want to remind, if you have use cases or roadblocks or issues that you're dealing with, even if you want to, you can be anonymous, that's fine. But this is all fodder for discussion and ways that that we can move this forward and see. Letty, that's such an incredible point you just made. Why would you exclude an entire market of people, potential revenue base, customer base? And as you said, and it's way easier to bake it into the design and development process than respond to litigation.
It takes a little bit of change, which no one likes. Change is uncomfortable, but it is, once you bake it in and once you make it part of your workflows, then it's just easy. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Judy.
We're going to move on now to our final panel, and I'm not seeing much coming in the way of questions in the chat. So you could start putting those in, because when we finish this panel, we're going to turn to you and start having that dialogue and discussion. But Simon, I think, is, by virtue of his job and also his own personal interest, very well aware of the great deal of work that remains to be done. And I think we all understand that it's going to take a lot of collaboration and a huge investment on the part of all of the individuals and organizations who are accountable and responsible to accomplish those goals. But please, Simon, help us identify the wish list for at least the short term and even some of the longer term objectives that we have.
Yeah, so I'm just going to frame this a little bit. Let's think about some important pieces of technology that appeared in the 20th century. So I'm thinking about the remote control for the TV. I'm thinking about the smartphone for the home button. And I'm thinking about voice assistants like Siri. All of those were designed initially for people with disabilities, and all of them turned into useful tools that we all use every day, right? Let me also tell you that 70% of people under 30 watch a video at least once a week without sound, so using the closed captions. And let me tell you that many people now start to use the audio description function on their TV, even if they don't have a visual impairment. I think in terms of the future of accessibility, for me, it's all about normalizing conversations and actually stopping thinking about this stuff as specialist technology that's only used by a few people in the corner, but actually as user experience tools that help us all use the content, the knowledge, the websites, the digital products and platforms that we interact with every day. I think when I go to accessibility fairs, I always talk about, okay, these things are up at the ceiling, right? So you got whizzy new braille readers, and you've got smart glasses, and you've got things at the cutting edge of technology, and that's marvelous, and it's fun and it's exciting. And as a visually impaired person, I'm very much looking forward to being able to adopt these things. But what I more care about is the flaw. And what I mean by that is making some fundamental elements of accessibility much more widespread. And what I mean by that is actually, I'm looking forward to the day where alt text isn't a specialist project and where we need to think how to do it, right? That actually we've got to a stage maybe with AI, right, where it's good enough that basically it generates alt text and then people are just used to reviewing it in the same way as when you're writing a book or a journal article. You get the final version to review at proof stage. We're starting to see, for example, on YouTube, captions starting to become just really regular, right? And actually the quality of the automated captions has improved a lot, right? Similarly, I'm thinking about accessibility metadata. We haven't talked about metadata yet, but of all the provisions in the European Accessibility Act, the metadata one is probably the one I'm most excited about. And the reason is because I'm pretty sick and tired of buying things and then finding that I can't actually use them because they're not accessible, right? Whereas the metadata provision is designed to tell people what accessibility features a product has and what it doesn't have. So therefore, I talked about empowerment and independence before. It means that a disabled person can make an informed buying decision ourselves, right? We're able to say, okay, that's not going to work for me, or great, this does work for me with my screen reader. I'm able to buy that and use that. And so I know that as, scholarly publishing people, content people, automation can sound scary, right? Because you can't automate creativity. You can't automate ideas. You can't automate learning, I don't think. But actually, what we're talking about here is really multimodal learning and allowing people to learn in whatever way suits them. So I think for me in the short term, it's going to be about really rolling out the features that we've started to see with the EAA and ADA. So image descriptions, video accessibility, so captions, transcripts, descriptions, metadata, and accessible file formats, right? So we're talking about tagged PDFs and we're talking about tagged EPUBs so that people can use this with assistive technology. We've already made a lot of progress in the accessible formats field in that, things like DRM aren't now getting in the way really of people being able to use assistive technology. That's great. I think stage one is normalizing all of that stuff. I then think stage two is really what I call accessibility adjacent things. So I'm talking about, for example, many of you will have seen those apps like 11 Labs, and I think Google has one as well, where you can make a podcast out of an article or a report. Actually, that's great for people who learn in different ways, right? For whom actually reading isn't the easiest, maybe, right? I'm an auditory learner, so that sounds great as an introduction. I'm thinking of plain language summaries, for example, maybe for people either with dyslexia or maybe some people with learning difficulties, that kind of thing, or maybe just for people who don't have time, right? Because a big disability we all have these days is a lack of time, and if we can do something about that, I think that would be great too. And so for me, when I think about the future in terms of accessibility, I'm not really that bothered about whizzy things that are going to cost thousands and thousands. I'm more interested in thinking about, okay, what can we do at scale to make sure that everybody has the same, everybody who has a accessibility need has the same choice at the same time to the same standard that everybody else has. That's what my vision is for the future of accessibility, I think. Letty, Caroline, I don't know what your thoughts are based on that. Feel free to build on it or to completely disagree.
Caroline, do you want to go?
Well, something, Simon, that you said kind of jumped out at me, but for a very different reason. You mentioned plain language summaries, and I'm a huge fan of plain language summaries. Not least of the reason which I work in a heavily technical and scientific environment. And as a librarian, I consider myself a very smart person, but I have trouble understanding a lot of the science that is published and discussed in my organization. I don't pretend to be an astrophysicist. I don't pretend to be a heliophysicist. I support them from a library perspective, but for a plain language summary, for me to read that, I can grasp what they're talking about and be able to anticipate their information needs, their research needs, but also plain language summaries promote interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research. Because if you have an astrobiologist and a geologist, or an astrobiologist and a humanities person, a historian, being able to, at least on a surface level, understand the research that's being put out there, that may promote some collaboration, which I find super exciting. So plain language summaries, not just for accessibility issues, but for promotion of science in general, I think is wonderful. That was my only comment. But I love the idea of normalizing this, making this just part and parcel of what we do, how we do it. And you're absolutely right. Using captions, using audio recordings, what we used to think of as the domain of accessibility are just really handy tools now. And the more we can think about them just being part of everyday services and offerings, the easier things will be, the better, and the more normalized things will be. So it won't be such, as we said at the top, such a stigma to ask for the careful consideration and accommodations for someone who has a disability, who might feel very, very vulnerable in asking for those accommodations. So I think that would be huge. That would be transformative, I think.
Yeah. I wish I could disagree with either of you and make this, a spicy conversation, but I just want to underscore again, Simon, your comment about moving away from, we don't need whizzy tools. We don't, honestly, I would like to not have 150 some people register for a conversation like this, because it's business as usual. Because accessibility is simply part of what we do as content providers and information professionals. So my wish list would be that it's not this add-on, this specialty stream of work, but instead just simply part of what we do.
I think.
Did I mischaracterize you, Simon?
No, not at all. I think just listening to both of you, just a couple of extra things I'd like to just mention briefly. One is, I'm hoping that with technology, content and how we access content becomes a bit more flexible. And what I mean by that is, right, I'm a visually impaired person, but I don't represent all visually impaired people. The solution that works for me might not work for other people, right? One of the really good things about EPUBs is that you can change the font size, you can change the line spacing, you can change the background color, the color contrast. And I'm really hoping that in the future, certainly I know the newest version of the PDF, just released by the PDF Association, apparently allows reflow, which means you'll be able to change the font size, right? And what I'm hoping is for more flexible content in the future and more flexible UIs. But also, I would like to think, just building what you just said, Letty, that we better understand the commercial value of accessibility, right? And that kind of what we call the purple pound, so the 15% of the world's working age population who have a disability, are seen as actually people that we want to engage and integrate into all our products and services. So, when we do user testing, actually, it would be great in the future if we said, okay, so we're going to have 10 testers and we're always going to make sure one of them has a disability, for example. I think there's a cultural change that I'm hoping for, that where we remove us and them, where them is kind of these people in the corner that we feel a bit sorry for, and there's just us. And we recognize that in the same way as Judy said, we're all temporarily able. Actually, this isn't just kind of a different class of people. These are just people, and actually have the same rights and same abilities to learn and to contribute as everybody else.
Plus one. I love Judy's comment too, in part because it pulls on what I would love all of us to exercise, which is our empathy muscle. Um, I teach a information design course, graduate course through San Jose State's information school. And I talk about design empathy because in that context, we need designers to get out of their own, particular worldview and try to imagine the information experience of other types of people with other levels, other, contexts, other levels of ability, other perspectives. But I would like all of us to work on our information empathy, our ability to not assume that our experience is universal. I mean, what incredible arrogance, but we do it all the time. And one of the things that I argue often with my clients is, this isn't a matter of charity, as Simon says, but it's also not a matter of this kind of side, this separate, stream of work. It's not that you have to add something. It's that in order to deliver your products and services to the world, that means acknowledging that not everyone has the same ability you do. That's ableist perspective, right? So I'm so eager to see us put that aside. But I have one more wish list I'd love to share with the virtual room, and that is for the librarians of the world. I would love to see and hear more about librarians halting contract negotiations for those providers that are not engaging in accessible publishing. And I don't mean that you're dismissing all content providers that are 100% perfect, because as Simon says, accessibility is never done. Design is never done. It's something I advocate regularly. We need to continue to respond to changes in technology, changes in human needs, changes in our culture. That means what we do is in constant iteration, constant development. So if we are able to make this business as usual, to understand that we are not out to exclude 1.5 billion people and all of the people in their lives. I mean, I can tell you the ferocity with which parents and spouses and family members of those with disabilities will absolutely not patronize you if they know that you are preventing access to your content. So I would love to see more hard negotiations come from the library licensing space as far as holding content providers, especially in the United States, where we are, in the land of ADA, where the content providers are a step away, but we are holding libraries and research institutions liable. So please turn that onus around to the content providers. That would be my wish list.
I'll let Carolyn speak, and then I'll have something to say about that particular comment, but go ahead.
No, I think you both have really touched on all the items I was thinking about. Letty, especially when you mentioned, I used the phrase "a market is a terrible thing to waste." A couple of billion people that are out there wanting to use products and services and needing information for a variety of reasons. It's a matter of practicality. It's and you're right, turning up the empathy, the information empathy is something that I believe librarians, we have in our genome. It's why we're librarians, but sometimes we do need to be reminded when we get sort of wrapped up in the everyday little struggles and putting out fires and dealing with what really amount to our sort of perceived emergencies, but really aren't emergencies. We need to think of the bigger picture. Why do we do what we do for, frankly, not a whole lot of money and not a whole lot of recognition? There has to be something more innate in that. And the community of people who are not able to access the information they need deserve to be, we need to pay attention. We need to work with them, in capital letters, not for, not about, with, to try and establish a dialogue, anticipate their needs, make sure the information is accessible on, like it's on all levels, not just screen readers, not just visual aids, not just auditory, but all your books that are on the top shelves. How
Mm.
many people can reach 7.5 feet to a top shelf? The archives that is only accessible by a very narrow staircase in the basement of a building. Who can get to the archives? Considerations like that. Do you have a microfilm reader where the knobs and the directions are large enough so that people can actually read them?
Mhm.
Things like that. So I think, yeah, like I said, both of you have really nailed it in terms of the everyday, the practicality, the making this just another part of what we do every day. And
Mhm.
Letty, I especially like your point about holding vendor and publishers' feet to the fire, and having a hard conversation about contract terms, contract negotiations, product developments,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
what that means to the end user. We all have to advocate actively for patrons, users, the people that we are serving.
So I'd like to go
100%.
back also and follow up a little bit on Letty's comment and question. And we're very fortunate here in having a general counsel who's very supportive of our contract negotiations and has been very willing to get on the calls with attorneys from the vendors and publishers, particularly on things like the ADA clauses. I think recognizing the risks to our institution by the way the ADA law is written. I have been a huge advocate, unsuccessfully in most cases, for probably good reason, but at least let's stop creating non-compliant content. Can you at least in this
Mm.
clause say from, the beginning of this, all new content added will be fully
Mhm.
accessible? I recognize it's hard to write an ADA clause where Elsevier is dealing with the back file. I mean, it's hard for me to write one for my little library press where I'm dealing with the whole back file instantly, right? But we've got to stop making the problem worse. And some of that means that our standards have to get better. So, we have a kind of a common basis for saying what that means. As Simon pointed out, you can say it's accessible, you can say it complies with, certain standards, but it may or may not really play out quite that way. But I
Mhm.
do think it's one of our responsibilities. And the law actually forces it to be one of our responsibilities to try to negotiate those clauses. And
Yeah.
again, to me, it's how soon can we stop creating non-compliant content so we are increasing the back file that we have to address at great cost. All the comments you all have made about, even the lawsuit and how much are you spending? How much are you
Yeah.
spending to go back to redo something that you could have done accessibly in the first place? So
I tell publishers, stop the bleeding.
yes,
Stop the bleeding.
please help us, right? Right.
Yeah. I'm going to share a link in the chat to a Scholarly Kitchen post, I think from a week or so ago, from a research librarian at University of Virginia School of Law. And she's just, she's making ADA Title II a bit easier to understand for those of us who are not lawyers, and making some recommendations about how libraries are impacted as well as how libraries can respond. So some good advice there for anyone who's interested.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. Any final comment? We're not seeing questions yet coming in the chat, but we can switch over to just asking people to raise their hands if they have a comment or a question they want to ask, or we can go back to letting you all ask each other some questions about.
Just one
Simon,
final
you have,
comment. Yeah,
Sure.
just one final comment to just chip in with, and that's that we expect in the next couple of years, just because you mentioned standards, Judy,
Yes.
the next version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to be published. And as I understand it, these are going to be pretty much a complete rewrite that will focus on personas much more at the moment than kind of overarching criteria. And so just going back to what I talked about in terms of more flexible and adaptable and customizable content and interfaces, I expect that actually that's what we're going to be seeing in the future, because I think that as we start to move towards more interactive and more, dare I say, kind of augmented reality type content, I think what we're going to see is an expectation that certainly at the cutting edge, content providers will provide interfaces that are more customizable by the user so that they can make content and websites, what have you, and products accessible in the way that suits them, as opposed to us telling them what accessible means.
Yeah.
So I think that could be an interesting development in the future.
Channeling Bill Kasdorf, I would underscore that, Simon, with a shout out to EPUB. The reflowable text, the ability for content to be easily reused in multiple modalities and multiple devices, multiple interfaces. EPUB certainly is the powerhouse behind making that possible. And from a product development perspective, I forgot to mention in my economic or sort of financial arguments, I often remind publishers that enriching their metadata for things like alt text also allows for a better search experience for everyone, a better audio experience for everyone, more content to, repurpose in different ways. So it's one of those win-wins. I think if we can see the innovations and the enhancements to our workflows to comply with accessibility protocols, you will also find a lot of other benefits that come from those enhancements. Monetizable innovations, right, Simon?
Mm-hmm.
I think another area where, as librarians, we have a responsibility in our institutions. We at UF have a very, very large number of authors, and the effort that we can make to try to work with those authors to increase their sensitivity about what they're doing, to try to encourage them to take the responsibility for the way they set up their illustrations, for the way they handle their alt text. It will help when you have tools that, right now we get a spell check and a grammar check. It'd be great if we got an alt text check that,
Yeah.
wait, you forgot to put it in, or wait,
Yeah.
So, I mean, those things will come in time, but I do think as librarians, and we need to be looking within our organizations to see what role can we play. We have a significant number of open access journals, not compared to Elsevier or others, but for us, we've got over 20 that the library has a relationship with the publishers. They're not journals that we, the libraries, publish, but that we host on an open access platform. And we're already working on how we communicate with the authors about their responsibility for the accessibility of the content that they're putting into those publications, and with the editors of those journals. So it's not like a journal that we're actually administering, but we are facilitating putting them on a platform for open access. So we have additional roles that we can and should be implementing better than we do.
And I think, Judy, you make an important point there, right? That it's about behaviors, not just technology. So, for example, Microsoft have included their accessibility checker in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc., for a few years now, and it's pretty good. I'm not saying it captures everything, but it captures all the major flaws. Who uses it, right? You use it if you care a lot about accessibility, but we don't, I think, as a society, have it in our minds, right? Yeah, every time, I need to save my document, and I also need to use the accessibility checker, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that the legislative change definitely helps move the needle, and I think tech change as well also takes us a little bit further. But I think what we're really looking for here is behavioral and cultural change. And as we know, that's an altogether harder nettle to grasp and isn't always in a straight line.
Well,
I'm so glad you mentioned Microsoft, because I wanted to give a shout out to Kat Holmes, and I'm going to provide another reading recommendation here in the chat. Kat Holmes is a human-centered designer that brought a lot of the accessibility checks and accessibility features to Microsoft products. This is a fabulous, quick, easy read. I digested it on a plane ride to a conference a few years ago. And it really underscores that social model, Simon, that you mentioned, as far as understanding that we are not othering those with disabilities, but instead that the culture is mismatched. Our ableist model is mismatched to include everyone equitably. So big shout out for this book. It's a fabulous read.
we could add these links that have been provided to the Google Doc where we're capturing the use cases and some of the resources that are available, because I think those would all be good things when we follow up with the people who have attended this.
Great idea.
Find them easily. We've got a few more minutes. I'm still not seeing questions coming in from our users, although we'd welcome them if you have them. But if there's any, maybe just to go around and let each of you do then a little wrap up.
Judy, I would just say, I believe we're all on LinkedIn. If everyone here wants to connect with us on LinkedIn, sometimes the questions and comments and inspiration comes at 2 o'clock in the morning, 48 hours later. So yeah, feel free to connect and ask questions or make comments and share. The Google Doc will still be available. So if you're sort of digesting and processing right now, great. The more the better. This conversation is not going to stop at 9:30. This is just the kickoff. It's just the beginning.
You're quite right.
Agreed. And I would love to have clients stop calling me for accessibility help. I mean, that would be my sign-off sentiment. I would love to see everyone become experts in accessibility, make it business as usual, and I can go get a different job.
Letty, you're the first consultant I've ever come across that said I would like clients to stop calling me.
Stop calling me.
That is a new sales pitch. Well done. I'm very impressed.
It's a first for everything.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I think for me, my hope, moving away from all of this, is simply that we remember that the people who use this content are people. That they're not, we're not a different class of individual. We are people, and you don't know how many we're talking about here. We're talking about millions and millions of people. So when you're thinking about accessibility yourself in your own organizations, actually think about this as something that helps a lot of people, and therefore really critical and core to our mission and what we do every day.
And my final thoughts, I want to thank Howard and Tara and everyone at Chorus for pulling this talk together. Thank you, Judy, for hosting, so ably hosting, and thank you, Letty and Simon, for sharing the stage and sharing your knowledge. This is an ongoing conversation for me. I am in continual learning mode when it comes to accessibility. The conversation is not done, and I hope to be further along in a year and 5 years and 10 years. So thanks, everybody.
And thank you all for your presentations, and thank you for the audience for your attention. And we'll look forward to keeping in touch. And, we had a seminar on this, a forum on this a few years ago. I think it's a topic that's going to continue to come up. But I'm going to turn things back over to Howard for our kind of final wrap up.
Yes, thanks. That was really quite interesting. I always get to learn a lot whenever I hear any of these speakers speak. And Judy, thank you for your able moderation. So I also want to thank our generous sponsors, ACM, Springer Nature, AIP Publishing, ACS, Wiley, Silverchair, and STM. And of course, you can always find more events on our events page, and there'll be more coming this year. So thank you all so much. We hope you have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to corresponding with you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
all.